that it's recording. Okay, now it is. Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much for the invitation. We think we really appreciate, Mark and I really appreciate this opportunity to explain a bit why we're doing this and how it should be approached so that, improves the experience for everyone. It improves the insight for us, for the funder, ESRC, and for yourselves. Next slide, please. I'd like to start by, so essentially this presentation is organized in a why, what, how structure. So I'd like to start by explaining a bit why we're doing this. Why are we going through these huge efforts of having everyone spending a couple of hours between now and December, thinking about their needs, what their needs are as a researcher, what they can do to fill in the gap, and how they might go about it. And the first one is that it's really important that through these years, you're not just in order to get at the end and be a research, have developed research skills and have a research output, you do need to have certain knowledge and skills and abilities. And what we want to make sure is that when you get to the end, you have developed these skills and abilities so that first you have a successful viva and then you go on to have a successful career. So this is an opportunity that we take every year, that you are going to take every year, to reflect on where are you now, what you need to have in place to succeed and how you're going to do that. This is something that, even though for you now it's in the scope of the PhD, this is something that you professionals need to do. I do this every year as part of my performance review at my university. It's around July. I need to do exactly the same exercise, and it's time consuming, but it's also a great opportunity to think about you and where you want to get and how to get there. So it is for us personally, it helps us inform initiatives that we're going to put in place at the level of the network. For instance, what sessions we should have for the summer conference, which training to commission. So it helps us develop those initiatives. It also is very important for us. We need to report back to ESRC to help them develop their own initiatives and understand what's happening. But then, of course, most importantly, it is for you. It's for you to understand how to put in place a strategy that will help you develop these skills. Because from now on, you are in charge of understanding what you need and developing those skills yourself. And then, of course, also take the opportunity to reflect on what you've done to achieve so far. So as shown in the next slide, please. This exercise, of course, in what this means in practice is that you will complete a survey between now and the beginning of December. The survey will have 5 parts. One is a bit of information about you, just so you know which is your program and so on. And then a section which is where you reflect quantitatively on where you think you are. Are you very strong on this particular skill? Are you weak on this particular knowledge, right? From 1 to 5, where are you? And then a qualitative section where you reflect on what you've done in the past year, which training programs you participated, which events, or if you've been on a placement or an OIV, you reflect on that. So there's both quantitative and qualitative. And then from these, once you reflect on what are your needs, what is your strength, what have you done, then you can focus on what you're going to do in the next year. And by next year, I mean the next 12 months. So if you are a full-time student, you're going to look at for the next 12 months what you aim to achieve. If you are a part-time student, it's still 12 months, but of course, you will have, if you are a 50% part-time student, you have half of the goals that would be expected for a normal full-time student. Then we have a final section in the end, which is optional, where you look at DEI factors. It helps us understand, for instance, how well we are provisioning for our students. For instance, there is a program, one of our training offers, where we don't have a lot of participation, but the participation we have is mostly from students with disability. That declare disability. So we are going to keep it in place. Whereas if you only looked at the average, we wouldn't keep it. So that's why this sometimes helps us make these sort of decisions. When you complete the survey, you need to allow time to discuss this with your supervisor. They will need to sign off. So make sure you alert them now, remind them now that this is taking place and that they will need to do a part. So you will have these plans, then they will write a little bit about your progress in the past year, what they think about your plans, whether they support it or not, and sign it off. So do allow time for that, please, and do let them know that this is taking place. And then next, please. So when you look at it, why are we asking you these particular questions? The reason we ask you questions along these dimensions is because it is aligned with the VTI research development framework that I think somebody has the microphone on. Anyway, I'll continue. So the questions that we ask and that Mark is going to explore in detail, they all align with the VTI research development framework. So this is a framework for PhD students in general, not just SENSS students, and basically it's broken down into 4 sections. One is the knowledge about how to do research, then is about sections around the researcher themselves, personal effectiveness and so on. Then it's about governance. There's another area around governance, so ethics, progress, and so on. And then a final one regarding engagement and impact. And then my final slide here is to say that, so you are going to, the point is that you will think about, look at all these 4 areas and think about, identify times during the year when you're going to focus on developing each one. And this is really important. That I know that you don't know now what is going to happen in October next year, but it's still important that you form an intention, that you look at your landscape. When are you going to have collecting data? When do you have commitments, personal commitments or professional commitments or things like that? And so that you put those kind of hard things on that landscape, and then you can plan around it so that when you reach the end of the year, you will have achieved it. Otherwise, if we don't make this kind of careful planning, we reach the end of the year and nothing has happened, or everything happened. We had lots of good intentions, but then it didn't happen. So that's what that's kind of my introduction, and now I hand over to Mark to talk specifically about the various sections of the DNA.
Thanks, Anna. So just going to talk through the different sections very quickly, just to pick up on the point about the VTI's researcher development framework. They've recently updated their framework, and we've done a little bit of translation work in thinking about this. They had moved from the kind of the 4 domains into slight reorganization to think about the sorts of different dimensions of skills and capacities and qualities in terms of the researcher, research, and then researcher community. Now, we've not entirely shifted how we've organized things, because we continue to find the 4 domains that they used previously really useful, but we're kind of translating a little bit into their new framework. So just going to talk through those areas of questions that you're asked about. And as Anna said earlier, there are kind of quantitative questions to invite you to kind of think about those things that you're strong, you feel, you have a good understanding of, that you're, really feel quite confident about, and those areas that you might feel less confident about. And then alongside of that, opportunity, of course, for you to kind of have a more, narrative reflection as appropriate and as useful for you. So the first area is really in terms of thinking about knowledge and skills for research. So this is, both the knowledge base in terms of your own particular subject areas, your research methods, your ability to do, information seeking. It might be, also for you to think about in terms of languages. Now, that may not be so important for some of you, but for others for whom, acquiring a second or maybe even a third language at this stage, that could be quite important and for you to be thinking about. And then also for you to reflect on your own kind of cognitive abilities, and then also not forgetting creativity within this. So it's inviting you to reflect on that. What are the areas that you feel really strong, and which areas that you think you need a bit of development on. Next slide, please, Jenny. The second area is one that would align with what the VTI now calls those kind of qualities and capacities for you as researchers. So, things like your own personal qualities you bring, and then other things alongside of that, like time management, how you kind of navigate and manage your working lives in relationship to this. And, this is also equally important for you alongside of course, thinking about your own professional and career development. So it's an opportunity to think about, what's working well here? What do you feel really confident about on these kind of things? And what are those other areas that may not be working so well? One of the things that came out of one of the DNAs last year was that folk were saying that time management was an issue for them, and we've just made a call. We'll come back to this later. We're just making a call shortly for folk to bring forward potentially some training in this area that we would offer. So this is one way that we're kind of actually inviting people to come forward and think about maybe putting on some training for SENS students in this area. But there may be other things that emerge out of this year's DNA that we will say, hey, this looks like a really key area for us to think about developing. I mean, I think another one of the events that we ran last year, trying to remember what exactly it was called, but it was related to that kind of reputation and esteem, right? Anna, you remember, you might be able to remind us of what that event was called. But again, it was kind of responding to things coming. Anna, what was it called?
Was around social media and personal branding for researchers.
Exactly, social branding for researchers. So I guess the point here is that these things that you are reflecting on and what we're getting back from you will also help us in shaping the sorts of training events that we are doing, as Anna mentioned. Let's go on to the next slide then, please, Jenny. So the third area is really in thinking about coming back to research, but how you manage research. I mean, clearly this will relate to time management as well. But then it's thinking about those kind of broader professional aspects of it. So things around health and safety, ethics, legal requirements, property and copyright, things about co-authorship and risk management in terms of planning. Some of these things that you might already be attending to and that you might be quite familiar with, but other things that you might not yet have had the opportunity. This gives us a good sense of, what are the key things that you're thinking about, or that we might be able to think about adding to our training programs. And we're going to come on to training available in just a minute. Let's go on to the next slide, Jenny, please. So the fourth final domain, which kind of aligns with what in the new Vitae framework they call research engagement and research communities. This is previously domain D. So, things like team working, people management, mentoring, collaboration, but then also through to communication and engagement across a variety of different kind of things. Can we just remind you again, please, to make sure that your mics are off so we don't get background noise. Thank you very much. Let's go on to the next slide, please, Jenny. And I think there was a question in the chat. Maybe we can come back to that. Those are the four domains. So again, that we've just covered. Again, it will invite you to give a kind of quantitative assessment, opportunity for a qualitative assessment. Now, one of the things that I would really encourage you to use the DNA to do, as Anna had already begun to indicate, is mapping out your timeline, your plans for the next 12 months, is also encourage you to dive a little bit deeply into the training that's on offer and available to you. And clearly as I say to our folk at Goldsmiths, the question oftentimes is not whether training available. It's really about being selective about the training that you want to undertake, and use the DNA to help guide you, right? And think about what are the areas that I really need to work on, that I'd really like support with, and things like this. I'm going to pass over to Jenny in just a minute, but just to talk to you about a reminder really about some of the core training opportunities available through SENS. I mean, obviously you also have training opportunities available to you in your own respective partner institutions, and that's an important source as well. But just to direct you in terms of SENS things, so as a reminder, we'll be having a SENS summer conference. How we organize and structure that will also be led by what we're getting back from you all in the DNA. A reminder that we'll be having a research and practice showcase, and this is run jointly with the Cambridge Doctoral Training Partnership, and this will be looking at last year we had a fantastic event. I think a number of you were likely there, but we'll be doing another event this year, getting folk who've done placements to come and talk about their experience doing that. For those of you just new, particularly to SENS this year, gives you an opportunity to find out a bit more about what that's about. We have the SENS UEA online training series, Sage Campus. Sage Campus is an enormous resource for folk to do self-directed learning. I suspect that most of anything that you would want to receive training about is likely there'll be something related to that through Sage Campus. It is a very self-directed learning thing. The UEA online training series, it is online, but it's synchronous rather than asynchronous or self-directed in that respect. But do have a look out for that, and keep your ear to the ground very much on our VLE for other opportunities. We've highlighted here the Brilliant Club, particularly in terms of offering opportunities, particularly for those who are thinking about developing your CV in terms of public engagement and things like this. They have a fantastic schools program, but they also offer placements as well. So do check those out. And of course, we have the SENS Scholar Series. If you are new to SENS, you may not be so familiar with this. Those that are continuing students with SENS with a little or a big E. If you haven't familiarized yourself, there was a fantastic series last year on Gen AI in research, and all of those sessions, including the one that Anna ran, are available there on YouTube for you. So fantastic opportunities in terms of, and we'll be announcing, we hope, by the beginning of the year, the next SENS Scholar Series. So do look out for that. The next slide, please, Jenny. SENS Specialist Training. This is new this year. It is a specialist training that's been developed with additional funding from the ESRC in a number of areas. Some of these might be really relevant to some of you, and again, encourage you as you're doing your DNA and thinking about what are the things that you really want to hone in on, to check in with the VLE about the sorts of specialist training that's on offer and think about what might match with you. Because, I mean, remember, part of the DNA is also asking you to plan for your year ahead. So, having the kind of the VLE training page open alongside of when you're doing the DNA form can be really, really useful. I'm about to hand it over to Jenny, but just before I do, because Jenny, you're going to talk about some other things, including the Doctoral Researcher Committee training available. Just one thing maybe to add is part of the survey also invites you to identify any areas, additional areas or gaps or training that you would like us to be looking at specifically. Encourage you to do that, but before you do that, really try and exhaust through your own institution or through what's on offer, through the SENS core training we offer, or through the specialist training. See what is out there and available. And indeed, in some of the things that Jenny's going to point you towards now. So Jenny, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Mark. So we're very lucky in SENS. We've got an amazing doctoral committee, and one of their flagship events is the writing retreat. This is going to be held in February at the University of Roehampton, and this is kind of a residential event that is subsidised through your RTSG funds, and it's basically just to focus you on writing. It's got social and active breaks to break things up, and it's a really great event that gets amazing feedback every year. So look out for information coming up about that, and you can always contact the committee as well if you've got any further questions. That's something that we'd really recommend people signing up to. And then other opportunities that the doctoral committee also do is with the Centio Journal. So this is where you can get involved either as an author or join the editorial team or sign up to be a reviewer. And again, further details about that can be obtained through the committee, and their sign up details, etc., are on these slides, which we'll circulate after. And then, as Mark mentioned earlier, we also have this funding for training development. So this is where staff and doctoral researchers can apply for funding. So if you've got an idea of a training event or activity that you'd like to develop and run, then you can apply for funding to put that on. We're shortly going to be launching it, and there's going to be application dates throughout the year. So just to give you an idea of what things have been funded previously, we've had a workshop recently on vicarious trauma. There's also one coming up for participatory research for global context. And we've got one on publishing in world-leading journals and qualitative methods. So you can see there the wide range of workshops, etc., that have been funded. And this year, we're particularly looking for events regarding time management and project management. So if you've got any ideas about that, then please put in an application, etc. And then we also advertise other training opportunities. So we get sent opportunity through from other DTPs, and we'll always put that on the VLE and circulate it in the VLE bulletin. So make sure you're reading those when they come out from Aaron. And again, these will be workshops that other DTPs are running. So we've had ones before on field work and research with children and young people, etc. And these, they're usually free. And if they're not, then you can, again, apply to use your RTSG if it's in relation to a training need that's been identified through your DNA. And then beyond the ESRC, there's also other training available through Chase, UK Data Service, NCRM, and we've got all the links there. So there's other resources that you can use to identify training that's available. And I'll just hand back to Anna just to finish off.
Yes, so the idea is that this gives an opportunity to think about your development holistically. So I think it's very common for students, people in general, just focus on very tangible things like learning this technique, doing this, learning how to use SPSS, whatever, but we really want you to think beyond these kind of research skills to things like your own time management, your own engagement with the community, and so on. And then think about this here alongside the whole PhD journey. So if you are beginning, this is the beginning of a journey. If you are more towards the end, how this links to the next career stages, and so on. And so on. It is driven by you, so you are the one who needs to think about what to do. You will, of course, discuss it with your supervisor, but we expect the initiative to come from you about deciding what to do next and identify how you're going to prioritize next year. So this is what I'm trying to show with this graph at the right. Please ignore the labels. This is just an example of a spidergram. The idea is that by the end of your PhD, you should be doing very well on all these dimensions. And of course, this year, you might want to focus on some areas, and then next year we'll develop the others. So that's what we mean by this graph. Please ignore the specific labels. So that's it, really. I think we're open for questions. I think there was one that I already tried to reply, Sasha. I don't know if you were happy with that answer. So the idea is, so that calendar was only meant to represent 12 months in the year, and then you're going to put your priorities there. Of course, each person will have specific milestones like upgrades or collecting data and so on. Sophie has a question regarding the writing retreat. Jenny, do you know when that is likely to take place? Oh,
Yes,
Valeria's already answered that.
Yeah.
Replied February.
February.
Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, any more questions?
I actually had a question. Oh, sorry, Leanne, you can go.
That's okay. You were quicker off the mark than me. But I guess just quickly, is there a way for those of us in after our first year that we can see our responses last year? I can't find if I've saved it anywhere.
That was actually my
locally.
question.
Great.
I believe the answer is yes.
Yes.
Jenny, maybe we can circulate a kind of a reply to everybody to remind you of that. But that information is still there, and we will make sure that you are able to access that.
Yeah, from what I understand, each person has a folder online, and this is there in that folder. But Felicity will be able to answer that.
Thanks, Anna. I think you're right. I think you're right. I think it should be in your own personal box
Yeah.
SENSS folder, but we will double check and confirm so that to make sure that you are able to have access to that.
And Martha has a question around how long does or should it take to fill in the form? I think this one of those questions that it really depends on your kind of personal style, if you're starting from scratch or if you used to do this. I can tell you from my own personal experience when I do my my kind of training needs and also development performance reviews. First, I have a quick stop at the form, right? I'll go through each section and I put some notes on each form, some direction. So develop these, I did that. And then I will start drilling down for each section, collecting details and so on. Because, for instance, you may realize something, oh, I should do a workshop around this. And then you're going to do some research about different types of workshop. But I would say it should take you several days spread out through the weeks, through these months that you're going to have, maybe 3 days spread out 6 half days or a couple of hours here and there. Remember that you also are supposed to discuss this with your supervisor, so you need to allow time for that. I think the reflection on how strong you are is probably very quick. Then talking about what you've done qualitatively will be a bit more, you need to collect evidence, so that will take some time depending. If you're very organized, this will be very quick. If, like me, you're not so well organized, you will need to go through things to find the evidence of what you've done. And then in terms of the plan for the future, this is where you really want to take time and think about what you want to do in the program. You want to be reflective and let things simmer. I would say, I don't know if others have ideas, maybe people that have done this before, how long it took them. Yes, James, it's done online. So once you've completed your sections, this is forwarded to your supervisor. They do it on the same form. They will write a comment. So they will see everything except the DEI section, and they will comment on your plans and things like that.
Kind of just looping back and reinforcing some of the things that you were saying as well, Anna, in terms of that, having that, effectively what you're producing here is also stuff that is useful to kind of, when you get to the further along and you want to produce your CV and there are things that you want to kind of draw out and extract, documenting the things that you've done, and we didn't include the slide here, but encouraging you always to think about training and development in the most expansive way possible, right? So any number of things that you do, it could be, you organize a workshop, you run a seminar, you present a paper in your department or your school, and in that kind of way. That's also a training event, and really use this as a kind of a way to build that kind of yourself, that data to draw on later.
Yes. And linked to this, the other thing I would say is during the year, make sure you revisit it. Don't you just do it now and forget about it. Revisit it several times during the year to see how you're doing with your plans. For instance, if you're going to apply for OIV, an overseas international visit, in August, you should now be thinking about that. It's not something that will come up. So we will expect to see that kind of coherence between what you're trying to do. I think we lost Mark, or is it? I think Mark, are you there?
Have I frozen? Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can. Maybe it's me. But there is a question regarding whether they could have a PDF of the form. Jenny, do you think something that could be organized?
I think it is possible. We can look into that. Maybe just to say though, the good thing about the Qualtrics forum, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anna and Jenny, is that you can actually navigate. You know what I mean? You don't have. You can go once you've done a section. That doesn't mean it's finally closed off from you. So you can go through the form and go back on yourself before you make a final submit. So it's not like other less flexible forms where you complete the page and then you go on and there's no way to go back without losing everything. But we can look into producing a PDF. I know I've seen a PDF. It isn't always the prettiest looking thing, but we'll see what we can do, and we could maybe, if when we circulate the slides, then add that on for you folks.
But you are asked if you're sure you want to submit at the end, because I did this to try, so don't worry about submitting by accident.
Yeah. And if you ever did submit by accident and wanted to retrieve it, we can do that too.
Exactly. I think last year we had the question around kind of what if I think the idea of the question is, what if I said I'm going to do something and then I don't do it? That's fine. I mean, this is not a contract, right? This is if you don't do it, I'm sure there was a good and what you have to do is, when you reach the end and you said you're going to do something and then you didn't, why was it? Was it because you were too optimist about your own time? Was it because you didn't have enough knowledge about what you should be doing and now it's different? Do you now have a better understanding of what it means to be a researcher? Was it because of something unexpected happened? And then you can reflect on how you adapt and your support structure and so on. So don't worry that, that it's not a contract. You're not going to be penalized for not doing it. Okay, thank you, Anna, for
thank you, Anna.
it.
Definitely. And to encourage you all, if there are things that you discover, other training that's available, please drop a line to Aaron, our SENSS administrator, and then he can post things on the VLE so that it makes it widely available for folk. And those of you that were at our recent induction, the new SENSS students, as I said there, and I'll just repeat it here for all of you, also take opportunities to share training that's available to you that might be available to students who are not funded. We're really trying to push this because there's such a wealth of things, and we just want to make sure that everyone has possibility of taking advantage of that where it's possible. What if we want to do something that we didn't write on the DNA and we need funding for it? A conference, for example. I mean, so when you put in for the RTSG, we do ask you to kind of relate it back to your DNA. And it may be that at the point that you've done the DNA, you don't even know about that conference, right? And you discover something later. But you could relate back to the DNA and say, you know, in the DNA, I was talking about, you know, I wanted to develop work in this area, right? Which might then relate to that conference, even if you have not specifically named that conference. That's perfectly fine.
Yes, exactly. Or you could relate it to, for instance, is this conference about, for instance, getting feedback on your findings? It will be something. Exactly. Or is this about developing a professional network? That would be other. So you will have, in your DNA, you will have thought about, I need to go and get feedback. So you would relate it to that. Even if you didn't think about that specific conference, you would relate it to which part of the network this conference is helping you, which part of the DNA this conference is helping you with. But on the other hand, Luana, this is exactly the point to think about. Okay, maybe I will want to. Maybe it makes sense to go to a conference. Which conferences are there in my field? So doing the DNA will give you an opportunity to think about that now and do that bit of research. No, so Mick, I think that's exactly the point. That if something didn't happen, you need to understand why. Well, if it was something beyond their control, it was something beyond their control. And then, of course, what can you do now to catch up, right? Or maybe, depending on the problems, if this is likely to reoccur, what kind of guardrails can you put now in place so you're not harmed by, your progress is not hindered again by these kind of problems. We all have these kind of things, right? A few years ago, no one thought about COVID. Now no one thinks about some of the conflicts we have, and they can impact us without us knowing. That's just life. It's okay. My little time I'm looking through page is this part. So what is could be problematic is in terms of your progress, because of course you have a certain amount of time to finish your work. So if you didn't have time to work through the PhD, this might have an impact on progress. So you will want to talk with your supervisor and possibly with Felicity around leave. You may want to take some leave to stop the clock, because the clock is still ticking unless you took time off. So in terms of the DNA is not the problem. The problem could be in terms of your funding and the clock continuing to tick. But that's something maybe we can discuss outside of this call. But I would like you to encourage again, think that DNA is not just about the training, right? Yes, it's training, but it's also other things like, for instance, reaching out to people on LinkedIn to develop a network. Is it about polishing your CV? Is it about going to conferences, right? It's not just training, okay? Is there anyone here who has done this before, who'd like to share their experience, to things like top tips, things to avoid, things to do?
Great suggestion if anyone's willing to do that.
Yeah. Is it possible to request funds before completing the DNA to allow more time for DNA formal addressing more urgent? So if this is something that you need the funds now, of course, go ahead and do it. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If you need it now, do it. If it can wait, but yes, of course. I think that's when we did this last time. One piece of advice that people with experience shared is that you really need to give plenty of notice to your supervisors, because
Yes.
they will be busy with end of term, or they get ill as well, and that it can be very frustrating and for you to keep chasing them when the deadline is impending. So tell them now. Tell them when the deadline is and when you will be sending the form. So it is on their diary. Otherwise, it's very stressful for you to be chasing them. So that's
Good advice, Anna. I was just going to circle back to Adam's question, because if this won't apply to all of you, but if you're a new SENS student, you'll know that as part of the application process, your application for funding, you kind of did like a mini DNA as part of that, particularly focused on the sorts of training that you did. So if there's like an RTSG funding for particular something that you need to do, you could always link it back to that as well. And it may be something that you want to pick some of those things that you can pick up on and say, in my application, I said, I need to develop these kind of areas. So you could refer back to that, and then you get that whole you're mapping your whole journey as a doctoral researcher from the moment you put in your application, really.
there's a question around the RTSG form.
Jenny, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, so that's one of the differences between DTP1 and DTP2. If you're sent with a little e and you started before October last year, you have £750, and if you're sent with a big E, you have £1,000 each year for RTSG.
And then one is asking, can the form be signed by the sector supervisor? Yes, absolutely, not a problem.
Jenny, does
Jenny, another
unused
question?
funding carry over?
So the way the RTSG works is that it's not a personal allowance for each researcher. It's a pooled sum of funding. So we kind of give people a sort of an allocation. So you've kind of got a limit with which to work in, because obviously the pot is not unlimited. But if you don't, so you have those limits each year, and then for DTP2, you then have £3,000 that you can call on throughout the whole length of your studentship. So if you don't feel pressured to use the whole 750 or £1,000 each year, but again, it's just so that everyone's aware, it's not a personal allocation to everyone. It is a pooled research that everyone can draw from. But yeah, it's not use it or lose it each year.
The question about if they should approach the form differently if they're completing a master's this year. I don't necessarily think so. I think, we're still inviting you, already begin thinking about and planning. I mean, obviously, if you're doing a master's, you've got a more structured program of training that you'll be doing this year. But there may be things that you want to be thinking about already that might fit alongside of that. I mean, obviously, your priority is to complete the course in that first year, but maybe thinking about as you're doing this, what are the kind of things that master's course is ticking off for you in terms of those areas? Anna, come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same approach. I would refer you back to that last slide where you have that spidergram. So if you think that when you finish, you want to have a 5 in all areas, you think, where should I focus my energy now, right? So you will be prioritizing different things, but you should still thinking about how am I going to, at the end of my journey, how am I going to get the 5 in all of these areas, right? So you have different priorities, but the process is the same, I think.
Any final questions? We've got, one from Adam. Equipment bought to support practice-based elements of PhD must be returned to SENSS if it exceeds a certain value.
Yeah. So this is this idea that it's a pooled resource, right? So you may have, for instance, some cameras or recorders, and we would want, and somebody else will be needing it in a couple of years' time. After you finish your data collection, somebody else will need it, and therefore we will recycle it. It's all about, first we have a limited pool of money, and we want to stretch it as much as we can so that we can support all of you. And then it's also about using taxpayers' money sensibly, right? All this money, which we're buying equipment, it's taxpayers' money, so we need to use it to support research as it was. Remember, that's it. That's how it works. As examples of these are recorders. I remember some students in DTP1, they were recording and they didn't want to use their phones, for instance, so they had, because of security, and so they had like these manual recorders that were used later and so on.
That's a good question, Sasha. Is there a list of equipment that's now available? Jenny, we could take that back to Felicity
Yeah.
and the team and see if that's a really good question. Well, it looks like questions are drying up. Thank you all for being here. And Valeria, thank you so much to the Doctoral Researcher Committee for organizing this event. I don't know if you want to say any words in closing yourself.
Well, I just wanted to thank Mark, Anna, and Jenny for joining in and contributing to the session. And it was actually really informative. I did my DNA last year, but the session was super refreshing. And yeah, it was just such a great reminder. And you went into a lot of detail, which was super helpful as well. And yeah, like it's always a pleasure to see you. And it's like, it's fantastic to see the community come together as well. So I will send the recording and the transcript off to Jenny. Might take a few minutes for it to load, but yeah. Well, I hope you all have a great evening, and yeah, feel free to reach out if you need any support.
Thanks so much,
Okay.
Valeria.
All right.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.